Hello, Abhilash.
Yes,
Yeah, you can start the session. Thank you.
sorry,
You
you're
can
not
start
audible.
the session. You can start the session.
Okay. So, hello everyone. Good evening. Today we have a pediatric case with us. I am Abhilash Singh, second year MBBS student. I am the chief event coordinator at Clinic Ace and I'll be moderating today's event for you all. I request everyone to mute themselves for smooth running of the session. Thank you. Along with me, we have Fauzia Sheikh, who is PR chief at Clinic Ace and will be co-moderating the event with me. Our presenters for today are Dr. Tubi Harita Kalyan, final year student from Velama Medical College, Hospital and Research Institute, Madurai. Our second presenter is Ravpreet Kaur Maan, final year student, MGM Medical College, Navi Mumbai. Today with us we have Dr. Nida Chilvan. She completed her MBBS from Grand Government Medical College, Mumbai in 2017. Currently she is pursuing her DNB in Pediatrics at BKL Valavalkar Rural Hospital. Along with ma'am, we have our professor and HOD of pediatrics, Dr. Suryakant Ingale sir. He being an excellent teacher is popular among students for his teaching. So let's get started with the session. Over to you, Lapreet.
Shall we proceed, ma'am?
Yes, please go ahead.
So, good evening, all. Myself, Ravpreet Kaur, final year student from the MGM Medical College, Navi Mumbai. And today I'm going to present the case of a child named Miss Nancy Ravat, 2-year-old baby girl brought to the pediatric OPD by her mother. The parent complains of child having fever since last 3 days, is crying continuously by holding her head and chest and refusing to eat anything. She coughs with a thick rusty sputum. On examination, percussion note was found impaired. Crepitations and bronchial breathing is heard over areas of consolidation, and radiograph shows lobar consolidation. Shall we proceed? So
Please
my
go ahead.
patient, Miss Nancy Ravat, 2 years old, female, resident of Kamoche, Navi Mumbai, Christian by religion, informant being mother, reliable, came to the MGM hospital on 4th November 2020. Date of examination was 5th November 2020. Next slide, please. With the chief complaints of high fever since last 3 days, cough since last 3 days.
Okay,
History.
Lavpreet, before you proceed further, coming to your slide number 1. Okay, so when I this slide.
Hello, ma'am.
Yes.
You're not audible now.
Am I audible now?
Yeah.
Your very first slides where you have given the personal details of the patient. Please come to that.
Yes.
Okay. So whenever you start describing your case, what is different from your? Am I audible?
Yes, ma'am.
Am I audible, guys? Okay. So, what is different from our adult presentation? What is different in the pediatric presentation is here we stress about certain things, like we stress.
Hello, ma'am. Ma'am, you're muted.
Ma'am,
I start again. So, in our pediatric case, there are certain things which are different from the adult, which are important, right? We stress on the birth order, we stress on the consanguinity. So, I have a question for the audience. Why is the consanguinity important in any pediatric case? Besides the presenters, anybody would like to answer this question? Why is consanguinity important? All right. So somebody says hereditary disorders. All right. But is it Okay, like what kind of hereditary disorders and how does consanguinity play a role in that? Anybody, what are the grades of consanguinity? What are the grades of consanguinity and why are they important? Okay. First degree is serious. Okay. So basically, I would like to tell you what are the grades of consanguinity. So we have 3 grades of consanguinity. The first grade, where the marriage has taken place between a brother and sister, the father and her daughter, the mother and her son. Okay. This is the first grade, which is quite rare in India, right? The second grade of consanguinity is where there is a marriage between the aunt and his aunt and her other like nephews and nieces, and the uncle and her nephews and nieces. And the third degree consanguinity comes in play when there is a marriage between the cousins. So we have that much more prominent in India. Like the third degree consanguinity is much more prominent in India. All right. Anybody has questions regards the grades of consanguinity? Am I clear with that? Consanguinity is important because if suppose there is consanguinity, as Tanvi has rightly said, the chances of hereditary disorders are much more prevalent in that case. For example, you have autosomal recessive disorders like thalassemia, sickle cell diseases, which are much more common in consanguineous marriages. Okay. What about the birth order? So we always have to mention about the birth order. So why is birth order important? Anyone? So birth order becomes important because as the birth order advances, there are more chances of serious diseases taking in. Also, there are more chances of the children being malnutrition, other infectious diseases because of overcrowding, because of lack of, say, financial constraints, other socioeconomic problems are there. That is the reason why, again, your birth order comes important. And informant is important because obviously, at least up to say 7 to 8 years, the child will not be able to give you every detail regard what problems he is suffering from. So we need some reliable informant. Whenever we see, again, we are using the word reliable. Now, why is that reliable thing important? It is important because if suppose the informant is not reliable, definitely you're going to have much more problems in eliciting your case history and further moving with the diagnosis. Okay. So whenever you present your pediatric case, you should say that my patient Nancy Rawat, 2-year-old female, resident of Kamothe, Navi Mumbai, Christian by religion, second by birth order, product of non-consanguineous marriage. The informant being the history is reliable. She was brought to me by the mother with complaints of. Am I clear with that? Anyone has some issues? Go ahead, lovely.
Yes. History of presenting illness. The child was apparently well 3 days back when she developed fever, which was sudden in onset, present throughout the day. The fever was high-grade type with rigors. No rashes were seen. Fever relieved after taking medications. The child was toxic during the interfebrile period. There is also history of cough since last 3 days, which was insidious in onset and lasting for a few minutes. The cough was initially dry to start with and later characterized by thick rusty sputum. There is no history of post-UC vomiting. There is history of rapid respiration, noisy breathing, and grunting. There is also history of irritability, excessive crying by holding her head and chest, with refusal to feed, and the child is lethargic. Shall we proceed now?
So, can you tell me what are the causes of high-grade fever with chills? And what is the difference between
There
chills
will
and
be
high?
bacterial, viral, or fungal infections.
Okay. Can you be a little more specific? Can you be a little
I'm
more
causing bacterial, viral, or fungal infections causing upper respiratory tract infections or lower respiratory tract infections or CNS infections, meningitis.
Okay.
Then you
See,
can say because of trauma.
so some of our members are saying pneumonia, malaria, which is correct. So let's go to the most common causes, guys. So streptococcal tonsillitis, urinary tract infections, any kind of abscess in the body, right? Encephalitis, right? All these are the most common causes, right? And as I was asking you, what about chills and rigors? What is the difference between chills and rigors?
So when it is accompanied by high-grade fever, it is chills. And when chills is accompanied with shivering, it's rigor.
Okay, but do you think your patient can tell you about chills? Okay, so chills is an objective, right? Chills is an objective feeling of feeling cold, right? So whenever it's a child more than 5 years of age, he can comment about the fact that, listen, I am getting chills, right? But rigors is in a younger child, less than 5 years of age, who's not able to make a mention about it. So the mother will tell you that I have seen the child shivering. That is when we talk about rigors, okay? And in your age group, causes of high-grade fever with chills, as I told you, tonsillitis is more common, UTI is more common, encephalitis is more common, and as some of your colleagues have said rightly, pneumonia is very common. Okay. Also, okay. Tell me one thing. Will a child of 2 years of age be able to expectorate the sputum? You have mentioned about expectoration of sputum. So, do you think a 2-year-old child will be able to expectorate the sputum?
Ma'am, instead of expectorating, he might swallow his secretions.
So, what history will the mother give you?
There may be a history of vomiting because of intake of secretions.
There will be history of vomiting. Absolutely right. There will be history of vomiting. So the mother will tell you that there will be a history of vomiting, and in that vomitus you're going to see, mucoid-like of vomiting. Also, sometimes mother gives you the history that in stool there is passage of mucoid-like material. Nimrata Kaur. Exactly, you're right. So in stools you have mucus. All right. Okay. Fine. Go ahead.
Next slide, please. There is no history of running nose, ear pain, or ear discharge. No history of mouth breathing, snoring, difficulty in swallowing, hoarseness of the voice. No history of bluish discoloration of the lips or extremities. No history of vomiting, diarrhea. No history of decreased activity, altered sensorium, convulsions, or seizures. No history of weight loss and failure to gain weight.
Okay. Also, just wait 1 minute, please. So you mentioned about a child being crying and irritable, right? So can you tell me, can you elicit the common causes why a child should be crying and irritable? And how will you distinguish that? Like, is this crying something related to the pathological or is it physiological? Like, so what are the pathological causes of why the child should be excessively crying in your age group?
And maybe because of raised intracranial tension, because of meningitis.
Right. You're right, but that is a very latter part of your topic. What are the more common causes why a child should be excessively crying? What are the points that you're going to be looking at? You're right, intracranial pressure is raised. Definitely, yes, the child will be irritable. But before that, do you think there are some other causes why the child should be irritable?
Pneumonia or tuberculosis.
So I'll tell you. The child can be excessively cranky when suppose the child has aerophagia. So what is aerophagia basically? So in smaller children, what happens is, whenever the child is bottle feeding, okay, the child will swallow some part of the air from the environment, because of which he will have that bloating sensation that is very uncomfortable for the child, and he starts crying. So mother constantly tells you post-feeding, so his abdomen has distended, he's constantly cranky even after feeding. That is known as aerophagia. Okay. Sometimes there will be a hunger cry, right? So you should first mention about this rather than directly going to your increased intracranial tension. Also, if suppose there is an insect bite, in that case also the child can be very cranky. Suppose there is ear discharge, there is acute otitis media, there is bilateral nasal block, there is perianal excoriation. Okay. All these are the more common causes rather why the child should be irritable. Okay, so you have to look at these points. Okay. Also, one more thing. Since we are talking about cough, there is a difference between productive cough and non-productive cough, right? So how will you, when does your cough become productive? Or rather, what is the anatomical differentiation for cough to occur? Like something based on the upper respiratory tract and lower respiratory tract you would like to make a mention about?
Ma'am, productive cough may be wet cough from the upper respiratory tract infections.
If you divide cough on the basis of anatomy, right? So upper respiratory tract infections are much more common with the dry type of cough. Okay, so if you have rhinitis, okay, have anything, any lesion above the vocal cord, more chances of dry cough. Okay? And whenever it is involving your lower respiratory tracts, it's involving the lung, it's in the lung parenchyma, it's involving the bronchiole, then you will definitely have cough with expectoration, right? Am I sure? Anybody has doubts? Go ahead.
Past history. No history of similar complaints in the past. No history of congenital anomalies. No history of coughs in the past or any contact with the cough's patient. No history of other illnesses or repeated cough disturbing the child's sleep. No history of any allergies were present. Shall we proceed, ma'am?
I have a question. What do you mean by Cox contact? Who is exactly a Cox contact? Do you call any patient of Cox as Cox contact?
Any person who is living with the patient who is who has contracted the tuberculosis, like within the family members, he is living for more than 2 weeks.
Okay, you're more about correct, but see, it is very important that the contact should be a very close contact and it should be an adult patient, all right? So the patient should be an adult patient because the tuberculosis pattern in pediatrics is quite different from what it is in adults. So whenever we talk about Cox contact, remember in mind, it has to be a close adult patient who has come in contact with the child, all right? Go ahead.
Yes, personal history.
Hello. Hello.
Yes, sir.
Can I add something?
Yes, sure, sir.
So Dr. Needa madam has exactly rightly told, but one more thing I would like to add, the adult patient who is a close contact in the household, but more of that of a sputum positive, because he will deliver a lot of droplets from his cough, and from that sputum positive he will deliver the acidophilus bacilli. The sputum positive case will be the more reliable rather than the just pulmonary infiltration. So sputum positive case, whenever there is a cavity formation in the lung, he will likely to deliver more and more droplets and more acidophilus bacilli. With one droplet, he will deliver millions of the acidophilus bacilli. So that is a more contagious rather than to have a pulmonary infiltration, right? So please remember this one more addition point, right? Yeah.
Thank you, sir.
Go ahead.
Thank you, sir. Personal history. Diet mixed, sleep disturbed. There is history of weight loss present. Bowel and bladder habits are normal.
Okay, I would like to see in cases of pediatric, rather than writing this as a personal history, when you're talking about the diet, you're already mentioning it in your dietary history, right? So you need not add this. And see, sleep disturbed, you really cannot comment in a pediatric child because the child is as it is very cranky. He may have a very different sleep pattern compared to adults. So I think we need not really add all these things. Sir, what is your say on it? Does she need to write separately personal history? Or we cover it, sir, right, in the dietary history itself? Okay, go ahead.
Next slide, please. Family history. No history of similar illness in the family. No contact with the Cox patient. Parents married for the 6 years. Non-consanguineous marriage. No history of similar illness in the sibling.
Fine. So just one question for you. What do you mean by a similar illness? So why is it important in a respiratory case? Which similar illness is important in a respiratory case? Yes, audience? Anyone? Okay, so communicable. No, but okay, fine. Viral disease is fine. Okay. Uh, do you think there is something related to hypersensitivity? Do you think asthma is common in families? Does it have some importance? Yes. So asthma runs in families, right? In a
Yes,
respiratory case, I am not talking per se regards to this case, but in respiratory case, as your peers have rightly said, yes, viral illnesses, yes, you ask in the family, any communicable disease, true. Also, you have to ask about history of asthma, which runs in families. Let's go ahead, please.
next slide, please. Birth history. Birth weight was 2 kg. The child cried immediately after birth. Mode of delivery, a cesarean section. Breastfeeding was initiated 5 hours after the delivery.
This statement is right, like breastfeeding was initiated within 5 hours of delivery. Don't you think it would have a very deteriorating effect on the child's health, right? So,
Yes, ma'am.
yes, so you think it has played some role? Was the child premature?
Yes, ma'am. Immunization history. Child is fully immunized up to date. Pneumococcal, influenza, and MMR vaccines have been taken.
So, which immunization schedule includes pneumococcal and influenza vaccines? Do all the schedules involve it? And which are we currently following in India?
A national immunization schedule and IAP.
IAP, right. So Harita is saying IAP, right? So IAP, like if you see the government immunization schedule, it is following the WHO immunization schedule, which is not having your pneumococcal and influenza vaccines. But the Indian Academy of Pediatrics has stressed upon even taking pneumococcal and influenza vaccines. All right. So whenever you are saying child is fully immunized up to date, make sure that you tell as per which schedule. So wherever, like you can say he has been fully immunized as per your IAP schedule or your WHO schedule. Right? Go ahead.
Next slide. Dietary history was taken by 24-hour recall method. In the morning, the child consumed one bread, which had 80 kilocalories of energy and 1.6 grams of protein. In afternoon, the child had one chapati with dry vegetables, which had 230 kilocalories of energy and 3.4 grams of protein. In the evening, he consumed 1 cup of milk along with 2 biscuits. It had 200 kilocalories of energy and 3 grams of protein. In dinner, the child consumed 1 chapati plus dry vegetable along with some rice, which had 340 kilocalories of energy and 5.4 grams of protein. Total calorie intake was 850 kilocalories and protein intake was 13.4 grams. Although the required amount was 160 kilocalories of energy and 16.7 grams. So we calculate the deficit as 210 kilocalories of energy and 3.3 grams of proteins.
So, Lovepreet, how have you calculated the calorie requirement for this patient?
Then we
What
had
is the
asked
method?
like one day 24 hours recall method.
Right, but see, how have you calculated the exact required calories for your patient? What is the method by which you calculate that? Okay, so we calculate the calorie content for any pediatric patient as per the Holiday-Segar's formula. Okay, so the method by which you are calculating this is known as the Holiday-Segar's formula.
Yes, ma'am.
Go ahead.
Developmental history. Developmental milestones are achieved appropriately and it corresponds to the chronological age.
Go ahead.
Next slide, please. Socioeconomic history. Father is a farmer, studied till 10th standard, lives in a pakka house in a 2-room kitchen in Chori. There are total 6 family members in the house. Overcrowding is present along with bad ventilation. Open defecation is also present. Municipal water supply was stored in a closed container. Open drains are present in the nearby areas. history of firewood cooking was present. According to VG Prasad classification, the child belongs to class 3.
What is the other classification in which we categorize socioeconomic status?
Modified Kuppaswamy scheme.
You're right. Okay. And how does the socioeconomic background of the patient have an impact in your particular system? Like, does it have a role in respiratory diseases?
Yes, ma'am. As overcrowding was present, there is also a history of indoor air pollution. As we can see, there was firewood cooking was present.
Yes.
Then other facilities like open defecation was present in the nearby areas.
So open defecation more correlates to your gastrointestinal problems rather than your respiratory. But yes, since overcrowding is there, since there is firewood cooking, all these can add to your respiratory issues. Yes? Go ahead.
So my summary is, here is a 2-year-old female child born out of a non-consanguineous marriage, belonging to class 3 according to BG Prasad classification, who is completely immunized with normal development milestones, came with history of fever since 3 days and cough since 3 days, with refusal to feed. So according to the history, it may be a case of lower respiratory tract infection of bacterial etiology.
Okay, lovely. Since you mentioned bacterial etiology, can you give me the differentiating points as to why you called it as a bacterial cause? I can say that this is a viral cause, right? So why would you relate to bacterial and not viral?
Ma'am, mostly there was a lower respiratory tract infection, so maybe because of bacterial etiology. And
whenever there is high-grade fever, okay, whenever you see high-grade fever, it always points towards a bacterial etiology. Remember, in viral pneumonias, the child will not present with a very high-grade fever. It is always in the bacterial aspect which the child will have high-grade fever. Also, a child who presents with a bacterial cause will be much more toxic, whereas in a viral cause, the child will not be that much toxic. Okay, and your inspectory findings, like obviously that comes in the examination part, but whenever you examine the child, your findings will be out of proportion to the distress that the child has in viral. Whereas in bacterial, as much as the child is toxic, as much as fever the child has, the child is equivalently having other findings, the examination findings. Okay, so that is how you can talk about. So whenever there is high grade fever, always think in terms of bacterial causes. Next,
yes,
please.
so further, my friend Harita would be continuing.
Good evening all, and I'm Harita Kalyan and I'll be dealing with the examination part. So on general examination, the patient was examined under broad daylight with due consent from the parents. The child is conscious, irritable and lethargic. She is moderately built and nourished. Mild pallor was present. The baby was non-icteric, non-clubbing, non-cyanose, no lymphadenopathy was present and no pedal edema. JVP was normal and not elevated. Next slide please.
Okay, Harita, please wait. In your general examination, so in respiratory findings, in a case of respiratory examination, what is important? Do you think you missed something?
A BCG scar should be.
No, I'm talking about okay, please go on the next slide. Okay, go ahead.
Vitals. The baby was febrile at the time of examination. The oral temperature measured about 100 degree Fahrenheit. Pulse 100 beats per minute in right radial artery. Regular. Normal volume. Normal character. Bilaterally equal. No radioradial and radiofemoral delay was observed. No thickening of vessel. And all peripheral pulses were felt. The blood pressure was recorded as 118 by 72 millimeter mercury, which was recorded in the right brachial artery in the supine posture. Respiratory rate, the respiratory rate was 54 breaths per minute. It was regular, and the contraction of axillary muscle was observed, and intercostal retractions were present.
So Harita, you spoke about the temperature, right? So what is the ideal method of measuring temperature in children? How do you measure temperature in children?
Rectal temperature is most preferred temperature, ma'am. But either oral or axillary temperature is measured in practical purposes. The temperature, in case of oral temperature, the bulb of the thermometer is placed at the base of the tongue with the bulb of the thermometer facing the upward part of the tongue.
In pediatrics, never make a mention about oral temperature. So we never take oral temperature in cases of children. Okay. So whenever you want to measure temperature, so when you talk about the core temperature, you're going to take the rectal temperature with the help of a rectal thermometer, right? And whenever you want to take the surface temperature, you use the axillary thermometer. Okay. Remember this. You never go for oral temperature in case of your children in pediatrics, because your oral cavity is much more moist in pediatric children, right? So there's high chance that other findings might misinterfere with your temperature findings, and that would mislead you. So remember, always you have to take axillary temperature for a minimum of 3 minutes and rectal temperature for a minimum of 2 minutes. And obviously rectal temperature is much more apt because it gives you the core body temperature. All right. Fine. You mentioned as the respiratory rate as 54. So is it normal for this child? For a 2-year-old child?
More than 40 breaths per minute is considered as tachypnea in a 2-year-old child, ma'am. So the child is
all right.
Child is
and why should a child have in a respiratory problem? Why should a child have tachypnea? What does tachypnea show you? What does it tell you?
There's a difficulty in breathing and
Okay, so basically, you get tachypnea because what happens is all your usual respiratory muscles, so your intercostals and diaphragm have fatigue, right? And your accessory muscles have come into play. Now the child has to take much more respiratory efforts to maintain his normal respiration, right? That is the reason you're going to be getting tachypnea. Am I clear?
Okay.
Good. Okay. In your first slide, you mentioned about cyanosis, you mentioned about clubbing, right? Okay, icterus, fine. I assume you know that icterus is not at all important in the case of respiratory examination, right? Do clubbing and cyanosis have any importance as far as the respiratory case is concerned?
Cyanosis occurs when there is decreased reduced hemoglobin, ma'am. When there is more of reduced hemoglobin, that is less than 5 milligram per deciliter of HB occurs.
Okay. So when you're talking about cyanosis, what kind of a cyanosis are you going to get in a respiratory case? Is it going to be peripheral or are you going to get central cyanosis?
Central cyanosis.
Sorry, so it will be peripheral cyanosis, okay? Whenever we talk about central cyanosis, whenever you get central cyanosis, you are always expecting the case of congenital cyanotic heart diseases. So remember, whenever there is cyanosis because of respiratory problems, you will always get peripheral cyanosis. So whenever you want to look for cyanosis in a respiratory case, always check your peripheral areas. Namely, your hands and distal areas have to be checked for, okay? Never utter the word central. Because central always points towards congenital cyanotic heart disease. Okay. What about clubbing? Is clubbing important in some respiratory problems?
Yes, ma'am. In clubbing occurs in cases of bronchiectasis.
Absolutely right. Very good. Yes.
And pleural effusion.
Okay, that must be lungs. Okay, never mind. Go ahead.
Next slide, please. Head-to-toe examination. The hair was found to be normally distributed and normal in color. The cranium was normal with no abnormalities. Mild pallor was present in the eyes and no bited spots were seen. Ears were normal and alar flaring was present. Normal dentition. The palate was normal. The tonsils were not enlarged and no abnormal facies were present. Next slide, please.
Yes, Harita, please wait here. Does normal distribution and normal color of hair have any importance? Like, since you mentioned it, can you please tell me why is normal distribution and normal color important? Anyone else, please?
In protein energy malnutrition.
Malnutrition, right? So Cheryl says malnutrition, absolutely right. So, okay. Okay, fine. So it is important in a case of malnutrition. Fine. What about again your bitted spots and pallor again?
It's vitamin A deficiency.
Absolutely right. So it gives you an idea about vitamin A deficiencies. Okay. Rather than cranium, do you think you should be mentioning something else instead of the cranium?
Fontanelles should be the fontanelles were closed by.
Not about. Okay. So suppose if you have a child, right? So you think that the head size is more than normal, yes, and you are finding that the fontanelles are open. Do you want to think about something when the fontanelles are open?
Congenital hypothyroidism.
Absolutely right. So you think about congenital hypothyroidism if your fontanelles are open, right? So you make a mention about the head size. Whenever you're doing the head to toe, I agree that you must have made a mention about it in the anthropometry, but do not say the cranium, okay? Make a mention about if the head size is normal or no, okay? If there is any frontal bossing, what does that signify? If there is some frontal bossing?
Vitamin D deficiency in case of rickets.
So you have to mention about that if there is any frontal bossing, if the shape of the head is normal or no, if the anterior and posterior fontanelles are open or they are well closed, have the sutures fused or they are normally placed. You have to make a mention about all these things, okay? And as you rightly said, bitted spot, it signifies vitamin A deficiency, okay? You mentioned about alar flare. Why is alar flare important?
It's a sign of respiratory distress. When there is a tachypnea,
Yes, it is a sign of respiratory distress, right? Okay, why is normal dentition important? What does it signify? Suppose if the dentition is fired, there is some problem with the dentition. Does it give you any idea about something?
there may be any syndromes, congenital syndromes, or any infectious causes which may lead to malocclusion of teeth.
Malocclusion due to any reason. Okay, what about the palate? What if the child has a high arch palate? Then what do you?
Tonsillitis, tonsil, and there's syphilis, congenital syphilis.
That if the child is having a high arched palate, the mother gives you a history of snoring, noisy breathing, then you think in terms of adenoids. So adenoids are very common in children. Okay, so if you have a high arched palate, you think about that. Also, malocclusion of teeth. You will get malocclusion of teeth in your hemolytic problem or hematological problems. Okay, so if the child is suffering from thalassemia, if the child is having sickle cell disease, then definitely his occlusion is there is malocclusion. All right. Okay, go ahead, please.
Next slide, please. The previous slide. Next slide. The neck was normal, no lymphadenopathy was present, and trachea was in midline. The chest was normal in shape, and intercostal retractions were present, no dilated veins. Pallor was seen in nail. Abdomen was soft, no organomegaly was present, and no pedal edema was present.
Okay, so my question is, you mentioned about pallor in the name, right? Which is the ideal site where you would want to check pallor in the child?
Oral mucosa, lower palpebral conjunctiva, base of tongue, nail beds, palms, and
So you have to first look for there because nails become pale much more later. If the child is anemic, right, you have to first check in the lower palpebral conjunctiva and sequentially you move downwards, right? Fine, go ahead.
next slide, please.
Excuse me, can you tell me a very common condition where the child is pale at this age, 2 years? Tell me some common conditions where the child is pale at the 2 years of the age in India. What are the common causes? Don't tell me thalassemia. What are the common causes you met with?
Protein energy malnutrition, sir.
Do you get protein energy malnutrition? All the children are pale, or there might be supporting finding, but I'm asking the etiology. What is the cause for that in Indian population?
Iron deficiency.
Very good. Iron deficiency. Can you tell me other supportive features which are suggestive of iron deficiency anemia other than pallor? One is the pallor. Second is
Lethargy, irritability.
no. I'm asking you the signs. I'm asking signs. There are 4-5 important signs by which you can diagnose. Clinical important signs. How will the tongue look like?
Macroglossia in case of vitamin D.
Somebody as Cheryl has told chylonychia. It is exactly right. But before chylonychia, you will all get the platynachia. Chylonychia is the later finding. So first of all, you get a flat nails, pale platynachia. And if it is not treated within 3 months, it might turn into the chylonychia. But before that, if you look at the tongue, you can diagnose iron deficiency anemia. You can diagnose vitamin B12 deficiency. You can diagnose
Macroglossia.
Macroglossia is large tongue. Why you should get large tongue in iron deficiency anemia?
In B12 deficiency, sir.
Is it large tongue or is it red tongue, red angry tongue? What happens to the tongue in iron deficiency? Let me tell you. This is absolute without papillae and a very, very bald and the smooth tongue you will get in the iron deficiency anemia. Okay? And you get the Kawasaki disease, strawberry tongue. There are so many. There are the clinical examination of the tongue. There are 8 to 10 findings are there. Some Miram has told as red angry tongue. That is okay, megaloblastic anemia. But commonest cause is iron deficiency anemia. Okay. Suppose you find the iron deficiency anemia. What may be the dose of the elemental iron you will give to child?
100 milligram.
Do you prescribe in a day dose or do you prescribe according to the per kilo of a child? 100 milligram if you give, the child will land into iron intoxication. He will start getting loose motions and the vomiting because iron is a very metallic in taste. So it is 5 to 6 milligram per kg of a elemental iron. Lovepreet has told exactly 3 to 6 milligram per kg. You have to continue for 3 months, and when the hemoglobin comes to the normal, you have to continue another 2 months just to cover the depot stores of the iron. Okay.
Yes,
So iron deficiency anemia is the most common in children. That's why I asked you this question. Okay. Go ahead. Neda madam will take over.
Next slide, please. Anthropometry. The weight was measured as 9 kg, which according to the growth chart was more than 2 standard deviations less than the mean weight for the age. And the IAP grading was grade 1 malnutrition. The height was recorded as 87 centimeter, which was normal for the child's age. The mid upper arm circumference was 13 centimeter, which indicates a moderate malnutrition. The head circumference was 48 centimeter, which was normal for her age.
Harita, you talked about weight for age, right? So how do you calculate the appropriate weight for age? How have you calculated the appropriate weight for age for your patient? Your child is 2 years, right? So have you
age into 6? Yes, ma'am. Age in months into 6 plus.
So it's
No,
actually
madam
age
is
in
asking you, how will you calculate percentage of weight age? Is it related to something expected?
The
Yeah.
observed weight by the expected weight into the percentage gives the percentage of the weight, ma'am, and which is classified according to the IAP grading.
Okay. So see, as you were rightly saying, so you have your formulas by which you calculate your expected weight, right? So like your age in months plus 9 upon 2, then 7x minus 5 divided by 2, 2x plus 8, right? Those are the formulas by which you calculate the age and weight. And by weight for age, what I mean is, how do you calculate the weight for age? So it is observed weight upon the expected weight into 100. This will give you a percentage, right? And that percentage you will fit into your IAP classification, and then you will decide if the child is malnourished or not. Okay? So it is observed weight divided by the expected weight into 100, which gives you the percentage classification, right? Similarly for height, between 2 and 12 years of age, you use the formula that you use.
In the height of the
it is 6x plus 77, right?
7.
You use that formula, you get the expected height, right? And again, the same formula, whenever you want to calculate height for age, you will take the observed height divided by the expected height into 100. Okay. Now, why does this become important in our case? Because see, we are talking about malnutrition, right? So what if the weight for age is less, what does it signify? Yes, anyone from the audience? What does weight for age, decreased weight for age signify? The weight for age which is less than normal. Okay, so weight for age, if the weight for age is less than normal, it signifies that the child is underweight, right? It is called as underweight. When the height for age is less than normal, what is it called?
Stunting.
Stunting. Absolutely right. And when is it called wasting?
Weight for height is less.
Absolutely right. So when weight for height is less than the expected, you called it as stunting. So this becomes absolutely important in the case of malnutrition. All right. And what about mid-arm circumference? So what is the tape by which you grade the malnutrition status with mid-arm circumference?
Shaki's tape.
Absolutely right. All right. Go ahead, please. Very good. Go ahead.
One more thing, being a protein energy, can I disturb you, no? Hello, can I interrupt? Being a pediatric age group, one must know what is the clinical classification of malnutrition. As Dr. Nida madam has told exactly right things about anthropometric, the same thing I'll ask you, how will you clinically diagnose? Because in PAM, because 80% people, we have got malnourished children. Okay, so how will you decide whether the baby has got underweight, simply marasmus, marasmic kwashiorkor, or he has got a kwashiorkor? Plain. So how will you decide what is the Wellcome Trust classification?
Sir, in case of marasmus, the child has a very dry, wrinkled, and there will be wasting.
No. I'm not asking you the clinical features. I'm asking according to the anthropometric weight for age, and with another feature like a edema. So consider both these things, weight for age and the edema of a child. How will you classify a Wellcome Trust classification?
Severe acute malnutrition.
No, that is totally different. That is SAM and MAM. They are totally different. I'm asking you Wellcome Trust. Have you heard of this?
No, sir.
Wellcome Trust? No. So if the child's percentage of weightage is either in between 60 to 80% or less than 60%, according to IAP. Okay. So if it is less than 60 to in between 60 to 80%, and if the child has a edema, if the child has got a 60 to 80% of weightage and child doesn't have edema, what will the clinical feature? If it is between 60 to 80%, child has a edema, it is a plain kwashiorkor. If it is in between 60 to 80 without edema, it is a marasmic kwashiorkor. If the child's percentage of weight age according to IAP is less than 60%, without edema is marasmus, and with edema is a marasmic kwashiorkor. Okay. So this is a clinical approach while narrating the diagnosis in the your last terminal stage. When you are narrating diagnosis, you always mention whether the child is marasmus, underweight, or whether the child is kwashiorkor or marasmic kwashiorkor. Right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Next slide, please. Systemic examination. On inspection, the chest was elliptical in shape and symmetrical. The trachea appears to be in midline. The apical impulse was not visible. Labored breathing was present. No spinal and chest wall abnormalities were seen. No scars, sinuses, dilated veins, chest wall edema was seen. The chest movement was reduced. Can I move on to the next slide, ma'am?
What do you mean by elliptical test? How can you clinically judge elliptical test? Is it possible to judge elliptical? This is a cross-sectional area, no? By which you can do the elliptical or if it is oval. How will you describe the chest? Is it elliptical or it is something like an abnormal shape of chest, normal, bilateral, symmetrical, or it is a pectus excavatum or pectus carinatum or barrel chest, like that? Clinical. You must be a clinician rather than the more of the pathologist and the... Yes or no?
Sure.
And if you don't know, it doesn't matter. Okay? You can study at the home. What are the different types of abnormal chest? Okay? So that is how you mention. And the child is, you have mentioned that moderately built. So it is obviously bilateral symmetrical chest. You can simply use the language. Okay?
Yes, sir.
Rather than going in elliptical, the many problems will stand. Okay? Right. You said trachea is central.
Yes,
How you
sir.
can
Yes,
say
sir.
on the inspection?
So it's by the trail signs. When
Very
the
good.
patient is asked to move towards when the sternocleidomastoid muscle of one side is and the patient is asked to move that side. If there is tracheal deviation, there will be
Right, you're right.
You're right. You're right.
Prominence. You're absolutely right. There'll be prominence of the sternocleidomastoid on the side of deviation. You're absolutely right. You're going good. Don't panic. Go ahead. You're going good.
Next slide. On palpation, the inspectory findings were confirmed. The tracheal position was confirmed to be.
No, if you talk about retractions, right? Rather than labored bleeding. See if you are seeing retractions in any part.
Intercostal retractions were seen. Ma'am.
Suprasternal, intercostal, or subcostal. Mention those retractions because the moment you talk about those retractions, it simply means that there is distress and the accessory muscles have come into play. Okay, so don't mention about labored breathing. You mention about the retractions wherever they are. All right.
And on palpation, the inspectory findings were confirmed. The tracheal position was confirmed to be in midline by the three-finger test. The apical impulse was felt to the left fourth intercostal space, half-inch lateral to the mid-clavicular line. No tenderness. The chest movements were reduced. Vocal fremitus was not elicited. As it is a 2-year-old.
How have you elicited the chest movements? Can you tell me? Like, how do you check for the chest movements?
When the thumb finger of both the hands, when the thumb finger of both the hands are placed in the midline, and when the patient is asked to breathe, if there is an equal movement on both sides, there is said to be a equal chest movement. And
as you rightly have told that you place the thumb in the midline, both the thumbs you place in the midline, and you see the separation of the thumb. Is there equal separation of the thumb with each chest movement? Right? That's how you elicit. So, if there is equal separation of the thumbs with each chest movement, you conclude that the chest movements are equal on both sides. Right? Go ahead, please.
Next slide, please. And on percussion, the percussion note was found to be impaired in the right infraclavicular, mammary, axillary, and the interscapular region, while the rest of the region was found to be resonant. Can I move?
Okay, you mentioned something about the TVF, right? You mentioned something about tactile vocal fremiters, right?
Yes.
Did you? Okay.
Yes, the child was.
So why is tactile vocal fremitus important? What importance does it hold in the case of a respiratory case?
In case of any consolidation or in case of any solid lesions inside the lung, there will be an increase in the resonance, increase in the fremitus or resonance, and it will be decreased in cases of in case of pneumothorax or something. In cases like when more air is present, there will be a decrease in the fremitus. There will be a decreased vibration of the sounds.
So it's basically it's how sound travels to a particular media, right? So if there is solidification of any media, definitely sound is going to travel much more, right? So tactile vocal fremitus is again a type of sound that is being conducted, right? So when the medium is solid, definitely your TVF has to increase. As you rightly said, in cases of pneumothorax, in cases of atelectasis, collapse, it will definitely decrease because everything has become gaseous and sound will take a much more longer time to travel through a gaseous media as compared to a solid media. Right?
Next slide, please.
Demonstrate it, TVF. How will you demonstrate TVF?
Sir, the patient is asked to is the patient is made to sit in a sitting posture, and the patient is asked to say either 1 or 99, or if
Okay.
in case of older it is seen in done in older children, sir, or in case of very younger children it is done at times when the baby is crying.
Very good.
And
So that's what I was asking you. How will you judge the TVF in the 2 years old child? So you can palpate the cry of a child on the either side. Compare it. Excellent answer. Go ahead.
and on auscultation findings, high-pitched bronchial breath sounds were heard along with coarse crepitations in the right infraclavicular, mammary, axillary, and the interscapular regions, whereas vesicular breath sounds were heard in the rest of the lung fields.
Yes. Yes, go ahead, please.
Next slide, please. Serious examination. No other added sounds were heard. No wheeze. No wheeze was heard, and no other added sounds like bronchophony, egophony was heard in this case. And serious examination. S1, S2 was heard. No murmurs. CNS, no focal neurological deficit. Periabdominal examination, soft and no organomegaly seen. Next slide, please. Summary. A 2-year-old female child born out of a non-consanguineous marriage belonging to class 3 according to BG Prasad classification, who is completely immunized with normal developmental milestones, came with history of fever since 3 days and cough since 3 days with refusal to feed, and on examination mild pallor was present, tachypnic, pulse was 100 per minute, trachea in position, percussion note was impaired in the infraclavicular, mammary, axillary and the interscapular regions on the right side, and on auscultation, high-pitched bronchial breath sounds were heard with coarse crepitations in the infraclavicular, mammary, axillary, and the interscapular region. Next slide, please. The patient is probably diagnosed as a case of lower respiratory tract infection, probably due to bacterial infection with right upper and middle lobe consolidation, along with grade 1 malnutrition.
How to take one.
Okay, that's your last slide, right? Okay. So see, there are many things which need to be discussed in a respiratory case, right? Harita and Lovepreet, you've done a very good job. It was a very good attempt. Okay? But there are certain take-home messages which I would like to tell you. There are certain there are certain topics which you need to stress on for everyone. Okay, this I'm talking for everyone. You need to stress upon certain topics whenever there is a respiratory case. Also, you being undergraduates, your examination is not going to hold a lot of importance. What your examiner will concentrate is how you come to the provisional diagnosis on the basis of your history. Okay, so taking the history in detail is very important. Okay. Whenever you talk about your respiratory system examination, your respiratory system, right? Your chief complaints are fever and cough. Okay, so it is very important that you describe each of this complaint in detail. Again, you use all the negative history both for fever and for cough so that you come to your possible diagnosis. Okay. Again, if it is a case of chronic respiratory disease, you have to look at malnutrition because a child with chronic respiratory problems is very prone to have malnutrition. Okay, so there are certain things that we've already discussed, but I would again like to make a mention about what points are important as far as your respiratory case is concerned. So you need to know what are the causes of high-grade fever with pills as far as your respiratory system is concerned. Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. What are the causes of inconsolable crying in children? Then, what are the causes of cough, productive and non-productive cough? Okay. And as we have already discussed, whenever is a child less than 5 years of age, you always speak about productive cough as being following in your vomitus or in your stools. Okay, so never say that the cough was dry. You can always say that the mother has given the history that there was post-tussive vomiting or the vomitus was loaded with mucoid-like particles and the stool was having mucus particles, indicating that the child has ingested the sputum. Okay, so you make a mention about that. Right? Then you also need to know what are the different respiratory noises. Okay, so there are inspiratory sounds and expiratory sounds. Okay, so your common inspiratory sounds are namely stridor, croup, snoring. Okay, these are your chief respiratory noises in the inspiratory part. I repeat, stridor, croup, and snoring. Okay, and whenever we talk about the expiratory noises, we chiefly deal with wheeze and grunting. Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. Okay. One more thing is, why are children much more susceptible to getting repeated respiratory tract infections? Okay, so we need to know this. Why are children much more susceptible? Anybody would like to answer this question? Okay, so basically, your pediatric airways, they're much small, and that's the reason they can get obstructed very easily. Okay. Secondly, your right bronchus is very short, very supine. So it is quite easy for any foreign body to easily get lodged there. And there is a phase of transient hypogammaglobulinemia in your pediatric age group. Because of transient hypogammaglobulinemia, what happens is the child will be much more prone to infections. Okay. Then I told you, you have to perfectly know what is the difference between a bacterial etiology causing a respiratory problem and a viral etiology causing a respiratory problem, right? So as I told you, whenever it's a high-grade fever, it points towards a bacterial etiology. Whenever there is a low-grade fever, it has to be viral. Other things are, in bacterial etiology, you will get many localized symptoms. Okay? Whereas if it is a viral thing, you will also have involvement of nose, you will have involvement of your other mucous areas. Okay? Then, as I told you, a child looks much more toxic if it is a bacterial etiology. Okay? Whereas in a viral etiology, the child looks more of well, but the seriousness of the situation is much more. Okay? If there is any lymphadenopathy, cervical lymphadenopathy, always think about a bacterial. Fine. Besides that, as I told you, examination findings like tachypnea is there, difficulty in breathing is there, retractions are there. They will be out of proportion to the fever in cases of viral etiology. But in bacterial etiologies, your fever and your other symptoms are going to correlate. Okay. Then we also made a mention about your who is a positive contact of tuberculosis. That's sort of added the point. So please keep that in mind. Who is a positive contact for a case of tuberculosis? Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. So besides this in your examination, as we made a mention, you need to concentrate on your vitals. Why temperature, pulse, and respiratory rate is important in the case of respiration. Okay. In a respiratory case, I mean, why are they important? Please know that. Okay. You should please read up what is tachypnea in different age groups. Okay. In pediatrics, what is tachypnea in different age groups? You need to know that. Okay. You need to know the causes of cyanosis and clubbing in a respiratory case. Besides that, you need to know your examination. You guys have presented it quite well. The examination was quite well, but it's very important that you know how you have to elicit each sign. Okay, how you should be eliciting each thing is to be known. And make sure that whatever findings you are telling in inspection and palpation, and when you're making a mentioning about your auscultation, they should correlate, right? Like for example, if you say that TVF is decreased in this area, in vocal resonance, it shouldn't be otherwise. It should be correlating with the same thing. Okay? So these things have to be kept in mind. Okay?
One more thing, in the auscultation, very important for the undergraduate, what are the types of breathing? Normal breathing is vesicular, abnormal breathings are either bronchial breathing or the bronchovesicular. You must know what are the various clinical differences. How will you diagrammatically represent this? So for example, vesicular breathing is a normal, which is because of a greater amount of the air coming and going from the lung. That's why you get the vesicular breathing. It is a rustling character. And whether the inspiration is very higher and loud and very short expiration phase. The inspiration phase is expiration phase is only 1/3 that of the inspiration phase in vesicular breathing. Okay, and there is no pause at all. While in bronchial breathing, the exact reversing occurs. Inspiration and expiration, they are reversed. So inspiration is very short and there is a prolonged expiration. Or sometimes they both are equal, but there is a definite pause in between inspiration and expiration. Classical example of bronchial breathing. There are three types. One is tubular, which is commonly seen in lobar pneumonia. One is a cavernous, which is for cavitation. Remember C for C, cavitation for the cavernous breathing, and amphoric breathing you will get in the hydropneumothorax. So it's a metallic or the echo type of breathing. And lastly, the bronchovesicular bronchovesicular breathing is a very typical, very short inspiration period and very, very prolonged expiration you will get. So these children are very struggling for the breath. So classically, emphysema and the asthmatic bronchitis. So you should be able to classify according to this. These are always asked in undergraduate. Whenever I go for as an examiner in every state, I ask this question. So please remember, undergraduate types of breathing are very, very important. Did you get that? Yeah.
Yes, sir.
So they have some diagrammatic representation, sir. You can go ahead. So this is basically showing the different lobes of the lung and on surface mapping. Go ahead, please.
Hello. Any audience or any speakers who are presented has got any doubts regarding this? Any doubts in this respiratory case? What you have been presented till now? You should try to maintain the proforma of every system, either maybe respiratory or maybe it is either CNS or maybe abdomen or maybe abdominal. Okay, you try to maintain the proforma and according to the proforma you should explain. So none of these things will be missed and you will come to everything. Okay.
So one of our students has the question, sir. We discussed about why respiratory infections are more common in pediatrics. Akhilesh is asking this question, sir.
You have already told no that because what happens if consider pediatric and the adult. If the one adult is suffering from respiratory disease, usually 10 children are suffering. So ratio is quite big. So pediatric airways, why? Because first thing, as Dr. Nida madam has rightly told, the pediatric airways are very, very small. What do you mean by the small airways are likely to obstruct more and more, either by the environment or by the foreign bodies. So adult has got a very big, large diameter airways. So their obstructive disease are very less common. That is one. Second, laryngeal tissues are very, very soft. So infection spreads very easily and it becomes diffuse in the pediatric, where adult laryngeal tissues are always stiff. Third, there is a hypogammaglobulinemia, which is a transient period from the birth up to the 4 years. So because of hypogammaglobulin level less, the immunity will be less and the chances of pollutional diseases are more and more in pediatric. The fourth thing, as you know, the respiration is very fast in children as compared to that. If you see yours and the mine respiratory rate is just 14 to 16. At the most it is 20. But the children used to respire usually around the 50, around the rate of 40. So what will happen? If they are respiring more and more, they will be exposed to more pollution. Yes or no? So more pollution, so more air will be consumed by more respiratory effort. So they are likely to get asthmatic bronchitis more. Right? Another, the right bronchus is a very short and very supine. So whatever the foreign bodies, the children are usually put the foreign bodies in the mouth, in the nose, pencil, short toys, everything like coin. They easily go and obstruct in the right bronchus more commonly because right bronchus is a very short and it is a straight one. But the adult right bronchus is a very oblique. So it is unlikely to get the foreign body. Right? So these are the causes why the respiratory tract diseases are more common in the children. Right? Are you satisfied?
Yes. So Akhilesh says, yes, sir. Thank you, sir. So there is one more question now from Kalyani. How about viral infections like COVID-19 affect infants, sir? So we are dealing with COVID-19, sir.
So first of all, the COVID in pediatric as such, as compared to the adults, it is a rare quantity. Because why? Because the children up to the age of 7 to 8 years, sometimes 10 years, there is a thymus, thymus, which is a physiologically hypertrophied lymphoid tissue. And the main COVID virus acts on what? Lymphoid tissue, our immunity. But as there is a big lymphoid tissue in the form of a thymus, these are less likely to get infected. Okay, so children are less likely to get in because of a physiological hypertrophy of thymus, and they have got a well-maintained CMI, cell-mediated immunity. But none of them, that it is not like that the children will not suffer from COVID, because if you get a close contact with the COVID patient, his droplets will liberate so many COVID viruses into the baby, and if the baby is malnourished with a depressed immunity, or the baby is on steroids, or the baby is on immunocompromised, they will easily swallow this through the droplets, and they might get. But as such, as per se, the children are less likely to get the COVID infection. Once they get the COVID infection, the chances of ARDS is very, very common in the children. So be aware of that. Right. Any other doubt? Yes, Lenny?
Anybody is having any other doubts?
See, there are many. Respiratory system is very easy and it is very difficult. Both extremes can be possible. But if you know the basics of the respiratory system, physiology of the breath sounds, all these things, then it is very, very easy. But if you don't know the basics, it is very, very difficult. Can anybody tell me how will you define the croup? Because very common in winter season and rainy season. As soon as the rainy season comes, June, July, so you will start getting the croup infection. So what is a croup? CROUP. What is the type of? It's a very typical type of the cough. Immediately, once you hear, you will never forget in your life. So it is a very harsh, it is a very high pitched, it is a loud, and it is a barking dog-like cough. Okay? So can I demonstrate? Like that. So the child will cough like a barking dog. So it is a high pitch, harsh, high, then very, very loud and a barking type of. It is always indicates it is the lesion is below the vocal cords. And if you get the lesion above the vocal cord, the patient will develop stridor. So that's the main difference between stridor and the croup. Croup is always because of a para-influenza B virus, adenovirus. But the stridor is due to upper airway obstruction. So please remember, when you are getting stridor, always think of upper airway obstruction above the vocal cord. And if you are getting croup, always think of the obstructive lesion below the vocal cord. Typical croup-like cough. You will get croup in acute episodic laryngitis, bacterial tracheitis, acute laryngotracheobronchitis, or you will get in the episodic laryngitis. So these are the common causes of croup. And stridor, whenever the patient has got upper airway obstruction. That's very easy to differentiate croup and the stridor, because stridor and the croup both are inspiratory sound. They usually stridor you will get in the inspiration, croup you will also get in inspiration. That is why you have to differentiate. Right? Any other doubts?
Guys, anybody has any other doubts? Yes, please feel free to ask. I think we can proceed with your presentation, whatever is there. Please go ahead.
I think it is presentation is over. She has already told the diagnosis.
Yes, sir. I think you have something more for this, or like this is the last slide?
Yes, ma'am, there is a question for the audience.
Okay, okay. Over to you, Lovepreet and Harita. Thank
Next
you.
slide, please.
And last question, as you are told, the right upper lobe and middle lobar consolidation. What will be the X-ray picture like this radiography? How will you confirm your diagnosis by your clinical judgment? What will be the X-ray picture?
Lobar consolidation.
Yeah, your diagnosis is lobar consolidation, the right upper and middle. So what will it cast the shadow like this? Want to confirm the diagnosis? No, by radiology. So what is the X-ray picture is like this? You will get a homogeneous uniform opacity in those areas with presence of air bronchogram. So within that opacity, you will find some air bronchogram picture. That means intermittent. Okay, opaque glass-like appearance is little different. For instead of opaque, you can tell homogeneous opacity. And you will get the air bronchogram picture. And if you see the trachea and the midline, they are always in the center. Please remember, in collapse or atelectasis also you will get the homogeneous opacity. But in collapse, trachea will be pulled toward the side of lesion. Similarly, in pleural effusion you will get homogeneous opacity. But in those cases, trachea and the mediastinum will be shifted to opposite side. So these are the radiological differences. Okay. So when you come to the clinic, as such bedside clinic, I got plenty of X-rays. I will show you very classical X-rays of consolidation, collapse, pneumothorax, effusion, empyema, everything. I have got a classic live X-rays. When you happen to have opportunity to meet in the ward, then I may show you. Other Dr. Nida might be explaining very well because she knows. So any more? So presentation, both of the presentations are very nice. Okay.
Thank you, sir.
Yes, girls, a very good job. All the very best to you for all your future endeavors. Okay, keep it up. Okay, we hand it over to you.
Ma'am, you're not audible.
I also thank the audience for being so good. Okay, thank you very much for all the cooperation and all the best, girls.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
Okay, have a nice night.
Thank you, sir.
Fauziya,
Yes. So thank you, Lovepreet and Harita. You both did an amazing job of presenting in the smoothest manner possible. We now have a question for all our members. A question would now be exhibited, and the first three participants who answered it correctly would be displayed on our Instagram page. Please type in your question in the chat box.
read out the question for them.
The question is, surfactant can be detected in the lung exudate from human fetuses as early as we have Nosheen Moledina answering 24 weeks, Tanvi Yotif 28 weeks, Vijaya Jyoti 22 weeks, Sirajuddin Jamadar 20 weeks. Any more answers? Akhilesh Kurup 28 weeks. Mehak 28 weeks. Any more answers? Nosheen is very close, just a hint. So, any more answers? Vijaya Joshi, that's right, it's 25 weeks. Okay, we'll move ahead. So, our considering Nosheen answered really closely, we have Nosheen, Vijaya Jyoti, and Nimrata as our winners. So please DM us your Instagram handles on our Instagram page. That would be needed for the shout out purpose. Also, I would like to take a moment to thank Dr. Nida Chilwan on behalf of all the members of Clinicase. We believe that the knowledge you have shared will be of immense help to each one of us present here. Also, a huge thanks to the Head of Department of Pediatrics, Dr. Suryakant Engale, sir. Thank you for being present and playing a significant role in the success of the evening. The presentation will be shared with all our members over mail. Thank you for joining. We shall end the meet now. Thank you.